Good evening, and welcome back to your adventure. I, of course, am Jack, aka Count Von Count, your narrator, storyteller, and guide through the lands of Kjlovania. I hope you're ready and excited to jump right back in where we left off last week. This, of course, is the Seven Masks of Malice.
The hollow hearth exhaled the last of its warmth as the party broke apart for sleep. Chairs scraped, armor unclasped, the low scrape of wariness passing from one body to the next like a tired lantern. Elias and the Hood lingered at their corner table, heads bowed over quiet words. The fire popped once, a gold moth escaping the log, and then the tavern settled into the slow breathing of midnight. Dorian's owl woke him before the moon finished its arc, two soft taps of metal claws on the window frame, with a gentle whir of gears. The artificer's eyes opened like shutters, the runes along his gauntlet coming alive one by one. In the hall, boards complained under boots as the others emerged. They descended to an empty common room, the hearth dimmed to coals, tankards turned mouth down, no Elias, no Hood. On the bar lay a folded note, weighted by a silver coin. Gabriel lifted it and read, voice low. We decided to go on ahead, one last time, to try and turn him. He is my brother, whether I like it or not. Do not follow unless you mean to end this. If we fail, finish what I couldn't. Signed the Hood. Silence settled like ash. Cassian broke it first, nodding at the brass bird on Dorian's shoulder. How long has your owl been waking you like a nursemaid? Dorian's mouth twitched. He rested a hand on the owl's broad head, and it leaned into his touch with the affection of a living thing. Since the day I built him, since, before that, if we're counting the piece of him I didn't build. You gave it a soul, Cassian said, not a question. Dorian's gaze dropped to the polished brass. When I was a boy, my brother and I were orphans. The woman who ran the orphanage sold futures, but not the good kind. She took coin from a demon in robes and metal in exchange for the souls of children, and she gave us to him. The runes along Dorian's right arm pulsed once, a heartbeat under metal. The ritual went wrong for the demon. Maybe our bond was too strong, I don't know. I woke up in a cellar that smelled like old iron, but my brother, he was gone. The only thing left was a shard, a clouded crystal that I held in my palm. His essence, his soul was trapped inside. It was all I could find of him, and years later when I knew enough to attempt blasphemy with a craftsman's hands, I fitted the shard into a body of brass. He stroked the owl's back. I can keep Thorin near, I just can't bring him home. Not yet. Cassian's eyes softened, some recognition passing there that belonged to men who had both lost themselves and kept walking. We'll fix it, he said, and this time he didn't sound like a liar. One day. One day is a workshop I haven't finished, Dorian said. This night is a problem we can solve. Juno tapped the silver coin with a gauntlet. Then we move. The Eldritch Tower. Now. They had barely taken 10 steps into the fog-stilled street when a shape peeled itself out of an alleyway, thin, rag-wrapped, and swaying like a rotten parchment in the wind. An old man, bare feet black with mud, reached blindly toward them. His face was a crater of wrinkles, his eyes nothing but scarred over hollows. Before anyone could react, his hand shot out and latched onto Cassian's arm with shocking strength. Beware, he croaked, breath sour with rot. His head twitched violently. Beware, the blood moon rises. Cassian recoiled, wrenching himself free. What the hell? The old man staggered back into the shadows, dissolving as if he'd never existed at all. No one had time to process it, because Gabriel suddenly convulsed. His eyes rolled back, white as bone, his knees locked, spine arching. His long hair lifted from his shoulders and began to float, weightless, as if though the air had lost its claim on him. Gabriel! Juno grabbed his shoulders. He didn't respond. A low hum vibrated through the street as his vision unfurled. He saw a sky torn inside out, red as slaughter, the moon rising slowly like an enormous bleeding eye. Then the scene inverted, the moon deepened to a crimson black, the sky collapsing into the void. Undead marched in endless ranks, red robes fluttered across a battlefield drowning in ash, and behind it all, a figure, towering, pale, radiant with blasphemous glory. A savior born of nightmares. Gabriel shuddered as the trance set him free. He let out a ragged gasp, knees buckling. Siberic caught him before he fell. Deep red, bright moon, undead, vampire overlord, world in darkness, Gabriel whispered. Jackson's voice was small in the heavy silence. A red moon? Yes, Dorian said, speaking up, grimacing as if though it pained him not to lecture and yet deeply delighted to do exactly that. The blood moon, a rare lunar event, full moon every 60 years. Actually, it's tied to deep gravitational shifts between... He kept talking, and talking, and talking. At some point, even Benny laid down and groaned. And if you track its cycle to this year, this month, in fact, it falls on March 31st. Well, technically, it will start sooner, but it will be at its peak on that date. Dorian concluded triumphantly, unaware that no one had listened past the first sentence, which means Xavier is planning something timed to the blood moon. Fantastic, Leaf muttered. 2 weeks to figure out how to stop an apocalypse. They left the streets of Withermarsh and into the seam of the night where the town gave way to the wild. Fog hugged the ground. Every reed wore dew like tiny glass knives. They spoke little, and when they did, the sound felt too loud for a marsh trying to pretend it was asleep. The tower announced itself before they saw it, first as a pressure in the air, a constant hum in the teeth, then as a wash of blue light seeping through the fog like drowned moonlight. When it finally rose in front of them, it didn't rise so much as grow, a spine of black stone piercing the night. The top vanished into low clouds. Symbols wormed along the masonry, flexing like things that didn't enjoy being read. The ground around the base was a ruin of old foundations and wet stone. Blue radiance throbbed from a ritual yard ringed in toppled columns. In the center, a figure stood within a sphere of shimmering force, blue robes thrashing in wind that existed only for him. 4 massive stone arms jutted from the earth like titans half buried, each upturned palm cradling a floating orb of blue fire. The light shuddered, stuttered, and streamed, feeding the sorcerer's shield in ribbons. That must be Sylvanas, Juno said quietly, kneeling to stay out of sight in the shadows of the forest. Where's Elias and the hood? Cassian returned. Spectral beasts prowled the edge of the field, things that weren't quite animals and weren't quite gone. A 2-headed serpent uncoiled from the air and tasted the night with tongues of cold light. A raven the size of a horse bent and rebent its silhouette like a paper cutout fighting the wind. Shapes gathered and dispersed at the edges of sight, wolves without eyes, plants with a procession of teeth. Sylvanas turned his head as if their approach was an answer to a question he'd asked hours ago. His voice did not shout, it filled. Ah, the puppets have finally danced their way into my web. How quaint. You think you've grasped the strings of fate, but it is I who pull at the very fibers of your destinies. You scurry about collecting your little victories, believing yourselves to be the heroes in a tale of your own making. How utterly naive. Oh, and your friends? Pitiful pawns, still playing at espionage as if rebellion can sway the tides of blood. Mere distractions from what waits beneath the door you fear to open. Do you not see? Xavier's reign is but the dawn of our ascension. You have chosen your sides poorly, and will pay with your lives. Good, Juno said dryly. I was worried he'd be humble. Hands, Dorian said, already reading the machinery of the field. Orbs feed the shield. Break the orbs, break him. Seberic lifted his shield. Then we break the orbs. The tower inhaled. The fight hit like a rock falling through ice. The serpent struck first, both heads lashing. Gabriel cut left, but too slow. Coils of cold wrapped his ribs and arms, fangs sinking through cloth and into skin like hot iron. He hissed as the thing bit again, white pain burning through him. Get off! He placed his hands on the serpent's glowing scales and focused a blast of energy that ripped the snake in half. Raven! Cassian shouted. The shadow bird folded in on itself, then exploded forward, a flurry of wings and beak. It slammed him mid-stride, claws raking, knocking him to the stones, breath gone, blood beginning to warm his skin inside his leather cloak. Benny growled and pounced, pushing the raven back, ferociously guarding his companion. Dion roared and went for the nearest stone arm. His hammer met granite in a ringing blow that shook his shoulders. The arm didn't crack, but the orb above it fluttered. He hit it again. Again, dust fell like blue snow. Jackson's bow sang a high, hard line, arrows like pinned notes. "Keep the wraiths off him," he barked, playing a deep gothic rhythm. Leaf was shadow to shadow, twin knives finding flesh that didn't exist, harrying the raven until it turned, furious, to chase him. Straight into Juno's waiting strike, her warhammer caught the bird's skull in a backhand that cracked the air. "Down, boy," she huffed. "Get set," Dorian said. "On 3, Dion, Saberic, Juno, hit the palms when I say. Cassian, Gabriel, Jackson, cover!" Spectral hounds broke against Saberic's shield like surf. He planted his feet, became the center of the field, sword flashing in precise arcs that carved absence into light. "Say the word, artificer!" Dorian's gauntlet blazed, runes cascading. "Now!" Dion's hammer fell like a verdict. The first orb flickered, fractured, and then went out with a hollow pop that bent the air. Juno vaulted another pillar and drove her gauntlet down, cracking another stone palm. The orb above it dimmed, coughing blue smoke. Saberic shouldered through a river of specters and brought his blade up in a brutal undercut that split the third orb like an overripe fruit. The shield around Sylvanas stuttered. He snarled a word that hurt to hear. The remaining orb blazed brighter, ropes of light thickening to hold the failing dome together. The raven found Cassian again. It hit him in a sideways rush, beak punching through leather. He cried out, one knee buckling. Gabriel stepped in, took the next strike on his forearm, and hissed as spectral venom chased his veins. "Ugly bird," he said through his teeth. Saberic pivoted, shield up, and bullied a tide of dead wind away from Dion as the barbarian reared back and smashed the fourth palm. Stone shrieked. The last orb flickered from blaze to candle to ember. "Finish it!" Dorian shouted. Juno charged, a serpent coiled for her, jaws yawning. She didn't slow. Hammer caught the snake mid-lunge. Its heads tore in opposite arcs and burst into sparks that blew away like dying stars. She planted, pivoted, and with a second, smaller motion, punched the final, guttering orb. Everything went quiet. Then the shield collapsed, air slamming back into the vacuum with a thunderclap. Sylvanas stood bare to the night, robes smoking, eyes feral with sudden mortality. For a heartbeat, he looked almost human, just a man who had been promised too much by the wrong god. Then he raised both hands and flung a lattice of blue sigils that slashed the stones at their feet, lines of burning geometry racing towards them. Saberic waded through the lines like a storm. Dorian swung his gauntlet, shattering one glyph with a hooked motion. Gabriel's shadow slipped under a second, and Juno shouldered through a third and was inside Sylvanas' guard before he finished the fourth. He tried to step back, but stumbled. Dion's hammer caught him in the hip, bone cracking. Leaf's blade took his wrist, and a bolt from Cassian's crossbow tore through his shoulder, interrupting the ball of fire that was growing in his palm. Sylvanas reeled, bared his teeth to scream a name. "Xavier, please. No. I was promised glory." "No more promises," Juno said, and brought her hammer down through Sylvanas' face with a wet finality. The field exhaled. The spectral menagerie unstitched itself and blew away, scraps of nightmare dissolving in the mist. For a long moment there was only the sound of rain coming back to the world. Cassian wiped blood from his mouth and looked up to the tower steps. "I'll check inside." He went in first, Benny at his heel, the dog's nails clicking on the wet stone. The tower's door yawned like a pulled tooth. Inside, the air was colder, steeped in chalk and blood and the sour tang of alchemy. Crates lined the walls in greedy stacks. Withermarsh brands scorched into the boards, the missing caravan's bones set neatly in rows. Reagents, medicines, ink, salt, tools. Too much order for anything kind. He found them in the inner chamber. Elias lay where he had fallen, eyes open to a ceiling painted with a sun that had long since burned out. The hood was beside him, his cloak thrown back, the scaled side of his face silvered by cold light. Both men's chests were ruined. Ribs flared outward as if something inside had tried to crawl free. The stone was black with the attempt. Cassian stood very still, the room tilted. Benny pressed against his leg until balance remembered him. He knelt. He closed Elias's eyes with 2 careful fingers, did the same for the hood, his touch lingering, an apology for a man who had kept secrets because the world refused to understand. Sticking from Elias's front pocket was the corner of an envelope. Cassian reached for it, plucking it gingerly from inside the man's coat, the corners of the paper stained with dry blood. The group found Cassian as he opened the envelope, A collective gasp and a dead weight filled the room. To the company I've chosen, Cassian read. My friends who have decided to stand against the darkness. If you are reading this, then fate has finally caught up with me. You may be asking yourselves why we did not wait for you like we agreed. For that, I am sorry. My friend Merrick was convinced he could turn Sylvanas and didn't want you to get in the way. But worry not, there is no need for mourning. I knew the odds when I took up the blade again. I only regret I won't be there when you all carve the path forward. I have secured you a house in Braxia, stone-built, 2 stories, quiet and tucked beneath the southern ridge of the upper tier near Adrian's castle. You'll know it by the silver wolf's head on the door, an old symbol of mine from another life. Within it, you'll find supplies, maps, and a space to breathe, if such a thing exists in that city of secrets. You've done more for this land than most armies ever have. You've fought in the muck and shadow when others have turned a blind eye. For that, I thank you. Not as a captain, not even as a friend, but as a man who's seen far too much and hoped far too little until you came along. But make no mistake, things are getting worse. The crimson sun tightens its grip on the cities. Whispers grow louder, and the blood moon draws near, and I don't know how, but I feel it in my bones. When that cursed moon rises red, everything will change. In Braxia, seek out Lord Adrian. He is powerful, cunning, and complex. I've had dealings with him. He honors his word, but he always weighs the scales in his favor. He may aid you, or he may bury you. Tread carefully. His interests are not always Kjlovania's. Leave the fight in your hands now. You've got more heart, more steel, and more grit than any mercenaries I've ever known. Watch each other's backs, and if you ever raise a mug to my name, make sure it's a strong one. Until the next life, Captain Elias Vane, Silver Wolf of Withermarsh. Honor to the end. No one spoke for a long time. Jackson set his fiddle on the table and rested both hands on it like a prayer. Gabriel stared at the letter until the ink looked like trenches. Juno swallowed hard and looked away. We can't carry the crates and the dead, she said, voice rough. We have to choose. We already did, Saberic said. He lifted Elias because no one else could bring themselves to, and Dion took Merrick. The group made their way out of the mire that was the Eldritch Tower. Jackson had been strangely quiet since the fight, his usual ironic flourish dimmed beneath something heavier even than losing acquaintances. Finally, when the others paused to breathe along the path, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden carving. A goat, exquisitely made. Its surface polished smooth, its tiny horns gilded, and beneath its hooves, a symbol carved with the same artistry and arrogance as the filigree etched into his fiddle. Cassian squinted. You took that from the caravan? Jackson cleared his throat. Found it under a crate. Wasn't exactly the time for sharing. He turned the figurine in his hand, watching the shadows catch on the curves. Truth is, I know who made this. The others watched him carefully. Jackson sighed, leaning back against a thick tree. Once, I was just a mediocre fiddler with delusions of grandeur. A tiefling with a dream and absolutely no talent to back it. My bow screeched, my fingers stumbled, and applause was something I imagined poorly. Gabriel raised a brow. You? Bad at something? Tragic, I know, Jackson said. My fingers were clumsy, my bow sounded like a dying cat, and no matter how hard I tried, perfection stayed about. He held his hand just above his head, this far out of reach. He lifted the goat carving with a bitter grin. So, one night, under a full moon, I asked the darkness for help, for mastery, for art worth hearing. I didn't care who listened, just as long as someone did. Gabriel's expression softened, and someone answered. Oh yes, Jackson said with theatrical dread, a demon with taste for theatrics and desperate musicians. He offered me flawless technique, supernatural skill, inspiration touched by infernal fire. Saberic crossed his arms. In exchange for your soul. Well, obviously, Jackson said. Greatness is expensive. He held up the figurine again. This is his creation. It bears his handiwork, and finding it in that caravan means he's most likely in Braxia, and involved in whatever this whole mess is. Dorian's brow furrowed. The supply disappearances, the arcane materials, Adrian's court. Exactly, Jackson said. He swallowed, his voice dropping lower. Which means going to Braxia isn't just dangerous, it's personal. Cassian stepped closer. Are you worried? Jackson hesitated, then with a flick of his wrist, he spun the goat figurine into his palm and flashed a weak smile. Terrified, darling, but fear makes for excellent music. He tucked the carving away. But if we do run into him, someone else does the talking, preferably someone without contractual obligations. Broke over Withermarsh like an apology. The fog thinned to a haze, the air still cold enough to hold its breath. And the first bird that tried to sing gave up halfway through the note. When the party crested the hill and saw the town again, it looked older than when they had left, leaner, smaller, already missing what it had lost. They carried Elias and Merrick on makeshift stretchers of timber and canvas. The weight was uneven, but the silence between them made it level. Gabriel led, head bowed. Dorian's brass owl clicked and whirred softly above them. Its wings whispered through the fog like a mechanical mourner. Benny trotted at Cassian's side, tail low, muzzle gray with dried rain. Old Ruin was waiting outside the hollow hearth as if the mist itself had whispered their approach. When he saw the shrouded bodies, his face fell apart. No, he rasped. Those bastards. He moved forward with a limp that seemed older than his years and gripped the canvas with trembling hands. They kept this place from falling to pieces. Juno bowed her head. They died trying to stop what's coming. Ruin swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. They'll be buried behind the tavern like they wanted. I'll see to it myself. His eyes glistened, but he didn't let the tears fall. You did right by them. You brought them home. For a long moment, no one spoke. The firelight from the tavern flickered weakly against their armor, their wounds, their exhaustion. Finally, Dorian broke the silence. We need to move soon, he said quietly. Elias mentioned Braxia, Lord Adrian, the Silver Wolf estate. Ruin nodded absently, still staring at the canvas. Roads long, muddy. The bridges are half rotted, and the hills crawl with things that don't die properly anymore. But if you follow the river east, you'll find the trade road to Braxia. Gabriel sighed. We'll make do. We always do. Maybe Dion smash? Dion said, forcing a grin. Juno glanced at Dion but didn't meet his smile. We'll be back, she said to Ruin. If the church comes sniffing again, just keep your head low. Ruin gave a grim smile. Ain't much lower I can get these days, love. They stepped away from the hollow hearth and Ruin began to tend to Elias and Merrick. I need to sharpen my sword before we go on another hike, Severick said gruffly. I could use some more bolts now that you mention it, Cassian chimed. Around the corner towards the edge of town to the south is the blacksmith, Ruin said from behind them, overhearing their pondering. Just a short walk. Dorian turned and nodded at the man, then back to the group. Okay, but let's make it quick. We can stop by the church while you do that. See if Father Ulrich has anything to say, he whispered. They moved on from the tavern quietly and in unison. The blacksmith's shop sat at the edge of town, its forged chimneys still smoldering from the night's rain. The air smelled of soot, iron, and the faint, bitter scent of blood that no one had noticed yet. Inside, the anvil stood cold. Tools lay scattered on the bench, unfinished horseshoes, a half-forged blade, and a child, no older than 8, stood on a stool behind the counter, hammering at a small piece of tin with intense concentration. He looked up as the door creaked open. Morning, he said brightly. You needin' something fixed? Cassian frowned. Where's your father? The boy puffed his chest a little. Name's Peter. Little Pete, mostly. Dad's out getting coal from the marsh road. I'm minding the shop till he's back. He wore a soot-streaked apron, sleeves rolled up, hands raw from work. He was a fiery little fellow. Jackson knelt beside the counter, smiling faintly. You're a hard worker, Pete. Not many boys your age could swing that hammer. Gotta learn sometime, Pete said, grinning shyly. Dad says I'll be better than him one day. Cassian's eyes narrowed. When did he leave? Pete blinked. Last night, I think. Or maybe earlier. Hard to tell with the fog. Jackson and Cassian shared a look, one part confusion, one part unease. Severick glanced around the forge. Something about the stillness felt off, like the room was holding its breath. Meanwhile, the rest of the group made their way toward the church. What they found stopped them cold. The chapel of the Crimson Sun was engulfed in flames. The roof had already collapsed inward, the stained glass shattered across the mud in ribbons of red and gold. Smoke clawed at the sky, dark and choking. Townsfolk swarmed the courtyard in panic, throwing buckets of murky water toward the inferno, but the fire seemed to breathe on its own, hungry, defiant. Juno clenched her fists at her sides. Where's Father Ulrich? One of the villagers coughed through the smoke. Gone. Haven't seen him since dawn. Maybe he started it, Leaf muttered. Or he ran, Juno said darkly. They always run when it's time for their own confession. The flames cracked and hissed like a thing laughing. They turned to head back towards the blacksmith, arriving to find Sir Saberic, Jackson, and Cassian standing outside, speaking in hushed voices. What is it? Gabriel said quietly. Something's off about this shop, Jackson returned, glancing over his shoulder at the doorway. There's a kid in there by himself, running the place. Juno looked at them quizzically. So? Let me talk to him. They moved into the small shop together. Pete? Jackson called softly. No answer. He was just here a second ago, Saberic said gruffly. Cassian walked around the counter towards the back and pushed the door open, and froze. A large man lay face up beside his own forge, in a pool of blood with his throat cut ear to ear. His hand still clutched a hammer, the knuckles white. The room smelled of copper and ash. Juno swore under her breath. What the? Leaf knelt, touching the blood. It's still warm. Benny's head shot up. He growled low in his throat and padded toward the back door, nose to the ground. His fur bristled. What is it, boy? Cassian said. Benny's got something. They followed the dog out of the rear of the shop, past the rain-slicked cobblestones and into the half-flooded tree line. The track started small, bare feet, child-sized, but a dozen steps in, they began to change. The prints deepened, toes stretched, the heel elongated. By the time the path reached the edge of the woods, the footprints belonged to something far larger, something wrong. Leaf crouched, studying them. He grew. He changed, Gabriel murmured. A few feet ahead, Dorian found something tangled in the bushes, a scrap of fabric, small, soot-stained. A child's apron. It was cut clean down the middle. They stood there for a long while, the forest silent except for the soft creak of branches overhead. Even the wind didn't dare whisper. Exasperated, the party looked at each other, hoping someone would have an answer to the unknown question. Juno looked back at the town, the rising column of smoke, the faint tolling of a bell that no one was ringing. Withermarsh is dying, she said quietly. One piece at a time. Gabriel nodded. Then we leave before it takes us with it. They returned to the hollow hearth one last time. Ruin stood at the doorway, sleeves rolled up, hands black with dirt from the graves he'd dug. His eyes asked the question before his mouth could. They're gone, Cassian said simply. All of them. Ruin nodded slowly. Then there's nothing left to hold you here. Gabriel looked at him, at the tavern, the marsh, the graves barely filled. We'll come back when we can. Ruin's voice cracked. Just come back alive. As they left the town, the first light of morning broke across the bog. It caught the smoke still rising from the church and turned it into something almost holy. Behind them, Withermarsh shrank into a memory. Mud, fire, and ghosts fading into mist. Ahead, the road to Braxia waited. Uncharted, dangerous, and exactly where they were meant to go.
And that wraps up another episode of the Seven Masks of Malice. I hope you're enjoying the journey and you're excited for what comes next. If you are, of course, don't forget to hit the subscribe, the like, the bell, do the things that help me out. And of course, we'll see you right here, same time, same place, next week.